My ex-fiancé told the bridal party I was a lifeguard who plays hero. Then the ring bearer went under the dock and didn't come up. That's the sentence that keeps replaying in my head in that order, because the order matters. Drew said it at 11:47 in the morning. Leo went off the dock at 12:23. 36 minutes between the insult and the proof. I counted later. I count things now. It's a habit from the job. My name is Maren Aldrich. I'm 35 years old. I've been a civilian swift water rescue technician and paramedic with the county for 12 years. And up until that Saturday in late July, I thought the worst thing Drew Langford could do to me was already done. When I drove up the gravel drive of the Oak Ridge Country Club that morning, the humidity felt heavy enough to drown in. But the real suffocation started inside, the kind of July air that sits on your chest and waits. The lake past the clubhouse looked like a sheet of pressed glass, flat and innocent, which is the most dangerous thing a body of water can look. There's a feeder inlet on the north side of that reservoir that runs cold and fast under the surface. I noticed it before I noticed the valet. I sat in my truck for 11 minutes before I went in. I keep my father's journal in the center console, wrapped in a Ziploc bag the way he wrapped it. The cover is cracked along the spine. The pages are crinkled, water-stained, faint Sharpie ink running where the sweat or the river got to it. I unwrapped it. I read the last entry the way I always read it, before something I don't want to do. Current was strong. Went in anyway. That's the job. He wrote that the night before he died. I was 19. He was 47. A volunteer firefighter in a county that didn't have enough volunteers, on a river that didn't care he had a daughter waiting at home. He drowned trying to reach a fisherman who'd already drowned. 16 years ago this October. People act like time softens that math. It doesn't. I closed the journal. I rubbed the surgical scars radiating out from my right kneecap. 4 pale lines under my pants where the orthopedic surgeon had to go in twice. The titanium hinge underneath made the small mechanical sound it makes when I bend the joint past 40 degrees, a sharp metallic click that sounds like a round being chambered when I walk. My squad calls it the click. I press my palm against my thigh to mute it without thinking. I was doing it in the truck before I'd even opened the door. 2 years ago, a minivan went off a county bridge during the spring flood. Class 4 rapids, brown water moving 20 miles an hour, the vehicle pinned sideways against a concrete abutment with the back end submerged. 2 kids in the rear seat, a girl and a boy, 4 and 6. I went in on a tethered line. I reached the broken passenger window. I pushed the girl out first, then the boy, and the boy was halfway up the line when the van shifted. The door frame caught my right knee against the abutment. I remember the sound more than the pain. A wet crack, then the cold, then my own voice on the radio sounding like somebody else's. They cut me out 40 minutes later. The reconstruction took 7 hours. The hinge is titanium. The brace is a heavy-duty hinged orthotic I wear under my pants every day I expect to move. It locks at full extension when I kick. It clicks when I sit, when I stand, when I shift my weight from one foot to the other in a country club parking lot, trying to convince myself to go inside. I didn't want to go to that brunch. I went because Chloe asked me, and Chloe was the bride. And Chloe used to be the kind of friend who'd hold your hair back at 23 and call your mother at 28 when she didn't know what else to do. She's not that friend anymore. She's marrying into Drew's social circle. The country club venue was subsidized through his development company. She let him control the guest list. She let him control the seating chart. She let him control the story. I knew all of that walking in. I went anyway. That's the job in a different uniform. The patio sat above the dock on a teak wood deck that threw the noon sun straight back into your eyes. 22 people at a long table set for a wedding magazine, white linen, lemon water, and cut crystal, condensation pooling at the base of every flute. The smell of warm catered salmon mixed with chlorine drifting up from the club pool. Champagne already open at 11 in the morning, because that's the kind of brunch this was. Drew was at the head of the table. Of course he was. He'd put himself there, next to the groom, with Chloe 2 seats down where she couldn't easily catch his eye. He stood up when I walked onto the patio, because standing up for me in public was the kind of small theater he'd always enjoyed. He hugged me with his hands flat on my shoulder blades, the way you hug a colleague's wife. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn when he proposed. "Everybody, this is Marin," he said, loud enough for the next table to hear. "Marin and I were engaged for a minute, back in another life. She's a lifeguard out at the county, sweetest girl you'll ever meet." I felt my brace click as I shifted my weight. I pressed my palm against my thigh. A bridesmaid named Hadley laughed, the way you laugh when you're not sure if a joke landed but you want to be on the right side of it. The groom's uncle, sitting at the far end of the table, didn't laugh. He was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a navy blazer that didn't quite fit him over the shoulders, the way a blazer fits a man who spent most of his life in a different kind of coat. He was looking at my right leg. I didn't know his name yet. I would, in about 30 minutes. I took the seat Chloe pointed me to, which was across from Drew and 1 chair down, close enough to hear him, and far enough that he could pretend he was talking to the table instead of at me. She squeezed my forearm when I sat. She didn't make eye contact. She turned to the bridesmaid on her left and asked about the floral arrangements. I should tell you something about Chloe before this goes any further. She's not cruel, she's just allergic to friction. She'll choose the version of any story that requires the least argument at the table. Drew figured that out about her years ago, the same way he figured it out about most people. He built his real estate career on it. He builds everything on it. I should also tell you, before I tell you the rest of what he said, that 2 days before the brunch, my phone rang on a Thursday morning, and a woman from Child Protective Services introduced herself politely and asked if Tuesday at 9 o'clock would work for a preliminary home inspection. She said it the way she'd said it 1,000 times. She said someone had filed a report expressing concern that my 7-year-old daughter Lily was being exposed to reckless living conditions during my storm callouts. She said it was routine. She said it was nothing to worry about, in the voice professionals use when they want you to worry less than you're about to. 3 days. From the brunch to Tuesday at 9. I had counted that too. The Fire Commission complaint had come the week before, a formal filing against me alleging I'd endangered a civilian during a rescue. A witness named on the form whose name didn't exist in any incident report I'd ever logged. My captain had called me into his office and slid the paperwork across his desk and said, "Marin, this is garbage, but we have to process it." Process meant a hearing. Process meant time off the truck. Process meant my name in the system, flagged for the next year minimum. I knew who'd filed both. I didn't have to wonder. If you think you know where this is going, keep watching. You don't. Drew topped off his own champagne first, which is a small thing that tells you everything. Then he leaned back in his chair, adjusted his left cuff, and looked at Hadley across the table. "You should ask her about it," he said. "She's too modest. Marin's a lifeguard who likes to play hero. It's sweet, really, but she couldn't hold a real career if she tried." He smiled when he said it. He didn't know I'd spent the morning icing a titanium hinge that was installed after a Class 4 Rapid crushed my leg against a submerged minivan. The table laughed. Not all of them, most of them. Chloe looked at her plate. The groom's uncle did not laugh and did not look away. He was watching my right hand, which was flat against my thigh, holding the brace still. Hadley turned to me, eyes wide and friendly in a way that wasn't quite friendly. Wait, so you're really a lifeguard, like at the pool? I work for the county, Drew, I said. She's being modest, Drew said. He was answering for me. He did that when we were engaged, too. She does the lake stuff, the summer drowning calls. It's seasonal mostly. He waved his hand like he was clearing cigar smoke. Honestly, between you and me, I think it's a grief thing. Her dad drowned when she was a kid. She's been chasing it ever since. It's not exactly healthy, but you can't tell her that. The patio went quiet for a half second, just long enough for a flute to clink against another flute somewhere down the table. I felt the brace click as I straightened my leg. I want you to understand something about restraint. Restraint is not the absence of a reaction. Restraint is the reaction held flat against the bone where nobody can see it. I'd practiced this in worse rooms. I'd practiced it in the hospital hallway when an attending told me I'd never run rescue again. I'd practiced it the night Drew set his ring on the kitchen counter and said low status in a voice he thought was kind. I knew how to keep my face still. I knew how to keep my hands quiet. I knew how to let a man say the worst thing he was ever going to say about me in public and not give him the gift of watching it land. I don't think that's quite it, Drew, I said. He smiled at me like I'd proven his point. See, he said, turning back to Hadley. She's a sweetheart. She really believes she's helping. That's the part I always loved about her, honestly. She's just addicted to the drama of it. Then he turned his back to me, lifted his glass toward the groom, and toasted the wedding. The brace clicked once under the table. I let it. Hadley laughed politely and reached for the breadbasket. The conversation shifted to honeymoon plans, to flight delays out of Denver, to whether the photographer was charging extra for the dock shots. The table moved on the way tables do, sliding past the cruelty, because the cruelty had been delivered with a smile and a champagne flute. I sat with my hand flat on my thigh and counted the people who hadn't laughed. Chloe, who was now cutting her salmon into pieces too small to eat. 2 of the groomsmen on the far end, who looked uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to say anything. And Captain Sam Harris, the groom's uncle, white hair cropped short, sun-creased face, sitting at the opposite end of the table with his hands folded around a coffee cup he hadn't touched. He was watching me the way I watch a river before I get in it. He hadn't looked at Drew once. The brunch wound down the way these things do. Servers cleared plates. Someone made a toast about the rehearsal dinner that night. Chloe stood up and announced that the bridal party was going to walk down to the dock for a few photos before everyone went back to their hotels to change. The photographer wanted the light off the water. I almost begged off. I almost picked up my keys and walked to my truck and let them have their photos without me. The CPS inspection was in 8 days. The fire commission letter was sitting in my glove box in a sealed envelope. I had nothing left to prove to anyone at that table, and nothing to gain by staying. But Leo, the ring bearer, had attached himself to my left hand, somewhere between the dessert course and the toast. He was 5, in a navy suit 2 sizes too big, and he had decided sometime during the meal that I was the safest adult in the vicinity. Kids do that sometimes. They sort the room faster than the adults do. He looked up at me with a rubber ball in his free hand and said, "Are you coming to the boats?" "I'm coming," I said. We walked down the slope together. He bounced the ball on the flagstones. The brace clicked twice on the gravel path, and I felt rather than saw Captain Harris fall in step about 10 feet behind us. The dock was longer than I'd expected, floating, aluminum-framed, with rubber bumpers along the pontoon slips. The lake stretched out gray-green and glass-flat in the noon heat. It looked like a postcard. It looked safe. It wasn't. I'd grown up on water like this. Reservoir lakes look still on the surface because the surface is the lie. Underneath, near the inlet where the river fed in and near the spillway on the far end, the current ran hard enough to drag a grown man sideways. The pontoon slips at Oak Ridge sat about 40 yards from the inlet channel. I'd noted it when I parked. I noted it again now. The wedding party arranged themselves at the end of the dock. The photographer began calling positions. Chloe to the center, bridesmaids fanning out, Drew at her shoulder with his hand on the small of her back, as if he'd been the one getting married. Leo wandered toward the edge with his ball, away from the photographer's frame, the way 5-year-olds do when adults stop paying attention. The air smelled like warm salmon and chlorine from the country club pool up the hill. Champagne flutes were lined up on a tray near the dock cleats, condensation pooling at their bases on the teak wood. A bee hovered near one of them. The photographer asked Chloe to tilt her chin. Somebody laughed. The lake didn't move. Leo bounced the ball. It hit the wood with a hollow, echoing thud that I would hear in my sleep for a month afterward. It bounced once, twice, and on the third bounce it skipped sideways off the edge of the dock and into the water. He didn't think. He was 5. He lunged. His suit jacket caught the air on the way down. His shoes hit the water before his hands did. I was already moving. There's a thing that happens in your body when you've done this enough times. Your hands undo your own jacket buttons before your brain has labeled the emergency. My boots came off in 2 kicks. My phone hit the dock. My trauma shears stayed clipped to my waistband because they belonged with me in the water. I heard Chloe scream behind me. I heard Drew say what the and nothing after that, 3 seconds. I went in feet first because the water was opaque and you never dive head first into water you can't see the bottom of. The cold hit me at the chest and then at the face, and the current grabbed my legs immediately, the inlet pull I'd clocked from the path. The water tasted metallic, copper bright, the way river water always does when it carries sediment, and the sediment hit my open eyes like sand, reducing visibility to inches. Leo was already 6 feet under and 4 feet sideways, his navy jacket a smear of dark against the underside of the pontoon hull. The hull was the problem. The pontoon was moored with 2 cleats fore and aft, and the current was pushing him under it, not past it. His jacket had snagged on the rear cleat bolt where it threaded through the deck. He was pinned. He was kicking. He was running out of time. I kicked once hard and the brace locked. I want to explain what that sounds like underwater. It is not a click anymore. It is a deep, mechanical thunk that travels up the femur into the hip. The titanium hinge engages at full extension and holds, and my right leg becomes a tool rather than a limb. I hooked it around the pontoon piling, which is what the hinge is for in the end. What I learned to do with it in 11 months of physical therapy. I locked my leg around the steel, and the current stopped dragging me sideways, and now I had 2 free hands and a fixed anchor and roughly 40 seconds of breath. His eyes were open. He saw me. That mattered more than I can tell you. A child who sees the rescuer stops fighting the water, and a child who stops fighting the water lives. I pulled the shears off my waistband. The jacket was good wool, expensive, snagged at the shoulder seam on the cleat bolt. I cut through the seam in 2 passes. The fabric let go. I wrapped my left arm under his armpit and across his chest, the way you carry a panicked swimmer, palm flat against the opposite shoulder, his back against my front so he couldn't grab me. I unlocked the brace with a hard inward rotation of my hip. The hinge released. The current took us. I let it for about 3 feet, then kicked sideways out of the channel, out from under the pontoon, into the open water on the far side. We surfaced together. He coughed once, weakly, and then he wasn't coughing, and I knew what that meant. I swam him to the dock ladder with one arm, hauled him up by his collar onto the boards, and laid him flat. Water came out of his suit in a steady stream onto the teakwood. The crowd above me was making a sound I'd heard before at scenes, a low collective noise that is not quite words. "Call 911, I said. I didn't look up. "Someone call 911 right now and tell them 5-year-old male, submersion unresponsive, Oak Ridge Country Club, North Dock." A voice I didn't recognize said, "Yes, yes, calling." The brace clicked as I knelt. I tilted his head. I cleared his mouth with my finger. No obstruction. I pinched his nose and gave him 2 slow rescue breaths, watching for chest rise. The chest rose. Airway was open. I checked his carotid with 2 fingers. There was a pulse, faint, but there. "Come on, buddy," I said. I said it the way I'd said it to a dozen other small bodies on a dozen other docks and roadsides. "Come on, breathe for me." He coughed. He coughed again, harder, and then he turned his head and threw up lake water onto the boards. And then he was crying, and a crying child is a breathing child, and a breathing child is a living child. I rolled him into recovery position on his left side. I pulled my soaked shirt sleeve up and pressed 2 fingers to his wrist to count his radial pulse. I was so focused on the count that I didn't notice my right pant leg. The water had pushed it up to mid-thigh when I climbed the ladder. The brace was fully exposed in the noon sun. Titanium hinge, carbon fiber struts, the surgical scars radiating out from my kneecap in 4 pale lines like spokes on a wheel. A shadow fell across me. I looked up. Captain Sam Harris was already on one knee beside me. He'd taken off his linen jacket. He laid it across Leo's chest without being asked, the way you cover a patient to preserve body heat. His eyes went to my hands on the pulse, to the recovery position, to the trauma shears still in my left fist, and then down to the brace. He stopped. He looked at the brace for a long second, then he looked at my face. "That click," he said. His voice was quiet, meant for me. "You're Aldrich. Spring flood of 2021. I held his eyes. "The minivan against the Henley Bridge abutment," he said. "2 kids out the rear window, the driver pinned. You were the diver." "Yes." "I read the after action," he said. 3 counties read the after action. The paramedics' siren started somewhere up the access road, faint and getting closer. Leo coughed again into Harris's jacket. I kept my fingers on his pulse. Harris stood up. "I want you to understand what happened next, because it happened in the space of about 12 seconds, and 12 seconds is enough time to rearrange a room permanently." Harris turned around to face the wedding party. They were clustered about 15 feet back on the dock, frozen the way civilians freeze when professionals are working, which is to say, not helpfully, but at least out of the way. Chloe had both hands over her mouth. 2 of the bridesmaids were crying. The photographer was holding her camera down at her side, like she'd forgotten what it was for. Drew was at the front of the group. His champagne flute was still in his hand. He hadn't moved since I went in the water. Harris walked toward him. He didn't walk fast. He walked the way a fire captain walks toward a homeowner who has just done something stupid on a scene, which is slowly and without any expression at all. He stopped about 4 feet from Drew. He was a shorter man than Drew by a couple of inches, but you wouldn't have known it from the way Drew was standing. "You," Harris said, "you were the one telling the table about her." Drew's mouth moved. I was just making a joke. I didn't." "She's a swift water rescue technician," Harris said. His voice was not loud. It carried the way a fire captain's voice carries on a scene, which is to say, every word landed clean. 12 years on the county team. She's pulled more dead weight out of currents than you'll ever meet. The brace on her leg is from extracting 2 children from a submerged vehicle in Class 4 rapids. She put it around a piling under that pontoon 30 seconds ago and held herself in the current with one leg, while she cut your nephew's jacket off a cleat bolt with one hand. He paused. The lake was very quiet. "Don't you ever," Harris said, "call her a lifeguard again." The flute moved in Drew's hand. A little champagne spilled over the rim onto the dock. I didn't know about the... You didn't ask what I did for the county, Drew." I said it from where I was kneeling. I didn't raise my voice. "You just told everyone what you wanted it to be." Drew looked at me. He looked at Harris. He looked back at me. His mouth was doing a thing I'd seen on patients in shock, opening and closing without producing sound. The siren got louder. I could hear the rig coming down the access road now, the diesel note I'd heard 1,000 times from inside the cab. Leo coughed again. I went back to his pulse. "I don't play hero, Drew," I said. I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the boy. I just go in when the current is strong. Behind me, I heard the bridal party move. It was a small sound, a collective shifting of feet on a floating dock, the rubber bumpers thudding once against the pontoon hull. But when I glanced up a moment later to check the access road for the rig, I saw what they had done. Every single person on that dock had turned their backs on Drew. Chloe, the bridesmaids, the 2 groomsmen who hadn't said a word all morning, Leo's parents who had run up the dock dripping and now stood watching me work on their son, with their hands pressed to their mouths. They had all turned without speaking to face the water, to face me. Drew was standing alone at the back of the dock with a half-empty champagne flute and a wet patch on his loafers. The rig came around the bend then, lights washing the teakwood in red and white, and I stopped looking at any of them. I gave my report to the lead medic as he came down the dock. Name and age, time submerged, time to respiration. Breath sounds clear on the left and diminished on the right. No visible trauma, possible aspiration. Recommend transport with C-spine precaution, as a precaution only because I didn't see him hit anything going in. The medic, a guy named Ruiz, I'd run 2 cardiac arrests with the year before, looked at me and then looked at my soaked clothes and my pushed-up pant leg and the hinge on my knee. "Aldrich," he said, "you off today?" I was. He almost smiled. He didn't, because there was a 5-year-old on a backboard between us, but it was in his eyes. "Nice work." They loaded Leo. His mother went with them. The rig pulled out. The siren faded back up the access road, and then it was just the lake again, glass flat, indifferent, and 23 people in wedding rehearsal clothes, standing on a dock that smelled like chlorine and catered salmon and pondweed. I unbuckled the brace finally and let it hang open around my knee. The hinge clicked once when I stood. Nobody on the dock pretended not to hear it now. Chloe was crying. Drew was gone. I don't know when he left. The CPS investigator called me Monday morning at 8:47 a.m. I was at the kitchen table with Lily, cutting the crusts off her toast the way she liked. The brace was on the chair beside me. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Ms. Patterson and said she was calling to inform me that the report filed against my household had been reviewed and dismissed without a home visit. The complainant provided information that didn't match any of our intake criteria, she said. Her voice was tired in the specific way of a person who spends her days untangling other people's lies. "We've flagged the file. If anything else comes in under your name, it gets escalated to my desk directly." "Thank you," I said. "Ms. Aldrich." A pause. "I read the incident report from the spring flood. The minivan." Another pause. "Your daughter is very lucky." I looked at Lily across the table. She was drawing a horse on the back of her placemat. The horse had 8 legs. "So am I," I said. I hung up. The Tuesday at 9 a.m. appointment that had been sitting in my chest like a fist for 8 days simply ceased to exist. I drank my coffee. I drove Lily to school. I came home and pulled the laundry out of the dryer and folded it on the couch. And I noticed at some point that my hands were shaking. Not from fear, just from the release of a thing I had been carrying for so long I'd forgotten I was carrying it. The call from the fire commission came Wednesday. The hearing officer was a woman named Dean I'd met twice at department functions. She didn't waste time. The safety complaint had been reviewed. The witness named in the report did not exist in any incident database, any volunteer roster, any civilian contact log. The narrative of the alleged incident did not match the operational record, the patient care report, or the radio traffic for that date. The complaint is dismissed with prejudice, she said. And Ms. Aldrich, I want to be clear with you. Filing a false report to a county fire commission is a misdemeanor under state code. We've forwarded Mr. Langford's name and the complaint packet to the district attorney's office for review. I can't tell you what they'll do. I can tell you his name is now in our system permanently. Understood. Take care of yourself. I did not call Drew. I did not text him. I did not drive past his office. I went to my shift on Thursday and ran 2 calls, a swimmer cramped in the reservoir and a kayaker pinned against a downed tree on the lower river. And I came home and I made spaghetti and I read Lily a chapter of her dinosaur book and I went to sleep. The rest of it came in pieces the way these things do through other people. Ruiz texted me Friday afternoon. Your boy Leo got discharged this morning. Mom said to tell you thank you. She cried when she said it. A bridesmaid named Hannah, who I had barely spoken to at the brunch, called me Saturday. She wanted me to know that Drew had been uninvited from the wedding photos. Chloe had made the call herself, which surprised Hannah and surprised me a little less. The groomsmen had stopped responding in the group chat. Drew had sent a long apology email to the bridal party on Thursday, multi-paragraph, full of the word context, and not one person had replied. He showed up at the rehearsal dinner, Hannah said, on Saturday night. Nobody talked to him. He stood by the bar for 40 minutes and then he left. I just thought you should know. Thank you for telling me. Marin. She hesitated. I'm sorry, I laughed at one of his jokes that morning. I didn't know. You didn't, I said. It's all right. It wasn't entirely all right, but it was close enough, and she was trying, and I had stopped expecting people to be braver than they are. Chloe's text came Sunday night. It was very long. I read it once standing at the kitchen sink, and then I put my phone face down on the counter and finished the dishes. I read it again later, sitting up in bed with Lily asleep beside me. Chloe apologized for the seating chart. She apologized for the guest list. She apologized for letting Drew talk the way he had talked at the brunch, and for looking away when he did. She said she had known on some level what kind of person he was, and she had chosen the easier thing because the venue was subsidized and the wedding was paid for, and she didn't want to make it complicated. She said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again. She asked if we could get coffee after the honeymoon, just the 2 of us. She said she missed me. I typed 3 different replies. I deleted all of them. Finally, I wrote, "Take care of yourself, Chloe." I hit send. I put the phone down. I turned off the lamp. She wasn't entirely wrong about herself. She had chosen the easy thing. She had looked away. I didn't hate her for it. I just wasn't ready to pretend it hadn't happened, and I wasn't going to lie and say sometime when I meant never, and I wasn't going to say never when the truth was that I didn't know yet. Sometime, maybe. Not now. Sunday evening, I drove back out to the lake. Not to the country club. There's a public access dock about a mile down the shoreline. A weathered timber thing the county maintains for the rescue team's training runs. I knew the gate code. I parked the truck and walked down with the journal in my hand and my brace clicking softly against the gravel. The sun was going down behind the ridgeline. The water had gone from glass to copper to something darker, and the air had cooled enough that the humidity wasn't a hand on my chest anymore, just a presence. The way the lake itself is always a presence when you've worked it long enough. I sat down on the end of the dock. I unstrapped the brace and set it beside me on the wood. The hinge clicked once as it opened. Then it was quiet. I rolled my pant legs up. I put my bare feet in the water. It was cold. Not river cold, not the kind of cold that takes your breath in the first second. Just lake cold, late July lake cold. The kind my father used to call good-thinking water. I opened the journal. The pages were crinkled the way they get. when paper has been wet and dried 100 times. The Sharpie ink had faded in places, gone almost gray on the older entries, still dark on the last one. I had read it more times than I could count. I read it again. Current was strong. Went in anyway. That's the job. He wrote it the night before he died. I was 19. He was 47. He went into a flooded creek the next morning after a kid who turned out to already be gone, and the creek took him too. And for 16 years I have read those 11 words and tried to decide if they were a warning or a benediction. Sitting on that dock with my feet in the water and a titanium hinge resting beside me on the wood, I understood finally that they were neither. They were just true. He was telling himself what he already knew. He wasn't being brave. He wasn't being reckless. He was naming the thing. Current was strong. Went in anyway. That's the job. Leah was going home from the hospital. My daughter was asleep in her bed. The CPS file was closed. Drew was somewhere I didn't have to think about. Chloe was somewhere I would think about later, maybe, if I decided to. And I was sitting on a dock with my feet in cold water, with a brace beside me and a journal in my lap. And I was alive, and my father was not. And the lake didn't care about either of those facts. And the not caring was, somehow, the part that let me breathe. I closed the journal. I sat there a while longer. The light went out of the sky in stages, blue to gray to the kind of dark where the water and the air become the same color. I'd go back to work Tuesday. There would be another call. There always is. Somebody's kid, somebody's husband, somebody who didn't read the gauge or didn't see the strainer or didn't believe the river when it told them no. I'd put the brace back on. The hinge would click. I'd go in. That's the job. The water doesn't care about your status. It only cares if you know how to swim. If you've ever had someone who was supposed to know you tell a room full of strangers a version of you that wasn't true, and stood there holding the real version in your chest because saying it out loud would have cost you something you weren't willing to spend, I want to know about it. Tell me in the comments where you were when it happened. Tell me what you didn't say. I read them, all of them, even the ones that come in months after the story goes up. And if you want to hear more of these, the ones about the quiet people the loud people underestimate,